Do you want to know more about what is happening in the wild where most of our favorite houseplants are coming from? Stick around with me and boy oh boy do I have a very interesting interview video for you. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, today's video is going to be a bit of a continuation of a previous video that I did talking about conservation, and I'll link it at the top there. You don't necessarily have to have watched the previous video, but I will put it at the top in case you wanted to. Now, that original video was me responding to a botanical researcher that's out in the field who started off as a bit of a houseplant enthusiast, Fraser, and I will put his socials at the top as well. And he was calling out a lot of the influencers and content creators, kind of saying, you know what, you all need to start picking up the slack now. There's less and less researchers out there. People need to be a bit more aware of what is happening. So I listened and I did my first video. But off the back of that, there was an awful lot of interest from the community, which is fantastic to see. You all loved that video so much. So I reached out to Fraser and said, you know what, let's make it a two-parter. Let's do an interview, just you and me, over Zoom, and let's dive into things a bit more deeply. And essentially that is what this video is. So without further ado, I will pop us over to the interview that I did with Fraser, and as always, I hope you enjoy. Right, so thanks for joining us. This is Fraser, everybody. I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a bit more and kind of tell the audience who you are and what you do.
So yeah, I'm known as Botanical Otter on social media, on YouTube and Instagram as well, but my actual name is Fraser Cook. I am living in Indonesia right now. I'm hopefully here for 3 years, but I'm funded for 2. I'm doing my PhD at the moment with the University of Kent, which is the DICE, the Conservation Institute, in collaboration with a university here in Bogor. So I'm living not in Jakarta, but south of Jakarta, a place called Bogor, which is near the Botanical Garden. I'm sponsored by them, and also I've got all the permits that one could ask for. And I've been told by a lot of my botanist friends, how on earth did you get a permit for Indonesia? So I'm living the dream, apparently.
You're living the dream, apparently, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm in my 2nd year now, but I've probably been working on this since 2021. So it's been a while. Yeah.
You've been going on it for a while. Also, for everybody that's watching this video, I will link socials either on the video or down below, so you can go and check Fraser's work out. But yeah, I thought let's start off with something kind of really simple, basically, because we've known each other for a while online for a few years now, actually. So I think maybe it might be a good thing to tell people kind of how you went from being a bit of a houseplant enthusiast, and kind of more specifically, if I remember correctly, your passion was more on the Hoya side of things.
Yeah.
Into the kind of real world of kind of conservation and also research within the field, basically.
Yeah, so I think back in 2021, was it no, actually that's a lie. So I first started training in horticulture in, I always forget what COVID started. So 2020.
Yeah, 2020.
Yeah. So I started, so I was, I had a gardening pass from the countryside, but living in London, it's like but I kind of took over the lease of this house. I had a balcony. I want to do more gardening here and that kind of thing. And I was buying from like a plant shop that's in East London regularly. And the person there who actually ended up doing the Q diploma told me to do the RHS. So that's how it all started. And then back in 2021, I was still studying it. And I was like, okay, I'm noticing a lot of people talking about these so-called rare plants online. And they're coming from countries with high forest deforestation, like South America, Indonesia. And I was asking a lot of questions like, okay, why are people buying these for thousands of dollars? You remember this, right? Auctions, it all goes on. Those like top 10 plant lists, like, okay, I don't have that much money. And then, and there were a lot of influencers showing them off, like talking about them, and they still do today. And I don't think, there was a guy called Bretman Rock, who's a makeup artist influencer. He did this plant tour and he was like, oh, this plant's extinct in the wild, and then just carried on. like it was some sort of flex. And that's kind of where I did a video on plant flexing. And if people don't know what plant flexing is, it's essentially like anyone who goes online and says, I just bought all these amazing handbags from designer labels, now made in China. But I mean, it's just that's another topic for another. But I mean, it's just showing you how the vulgarity of like is I think it's quite vulgar to show off to people how much you spend on something, because it's just you're flexing your wealth. And then another influencer from the UK went to Thailand. I won't say any names. Was saying, "Oh, we don't know these plants have been poached." I'm like, "Yeah, we do. Like, it's not that difficult." So that's and at that time, I started speaking to a botanist called Michael Roda, who's the I like to think he's like number one Hoya man now, but he would deny that. We're good friends, so I say that all the time. And like we were talking about conservation of the plant trade. I was making some of my reels I was making, and he was said, "Do you want to make more on the new update?" So I started doing that. And then at the same time, there's a guy called Glenn in Indonesia basically started to make videos like me, and I was like, "Hang on a minute." And then we started talking, and he was, "I'm really inspired by your work because we have a real issue here that a lot of the plant hunters and resellers aren't being sustainable." So after, and then at that same point, I was talking to a professor at the time, ethnobotany at University of Kent about what was going on. And I was saying, look, I I need to think about my next plan after my diploma. Gardening isn't probably a viable option for me. I haven't got a partner, I haven't got backing, I'm not from money. So you know how difficult the industry is. Like it is really difficult to enter it if you haven't got a lot of money. And so I was like, I've always thought about doing a PhD. And he was like, doing further study, this could be an opportunity for me so I'm not too sure. So at that point, I had actually applied for a master's of research, but deferred it. So when I went to Indonesia, it was like a reconnaissance trip to kind of say, right, if I'm going to do this, let me solidify and see what's going on. What happened was I went across I went to Borneo, like West Kalimantan side, really deep middle Borneo. Yeah. I was just like, you can imagine, I was just like, dreams come true, I
Yeah,
never thought I'd
amazing.
do this. And then I went to Lampung, which is South Sumatra.
Mhm.
And then I went to do a talk. And then from that talk, I was like, can you meet the vice rector, who's now my boss here? And he was like, I just presented all my initial findings with him. And he was like, okay, right, you're gonna come here. I'm gonna offer you a job at the same time. I was like, what? What's going on? Because I'm doing a PhD then, and I had to still officially apply, and and then yeah, I guess at that point I didn't really understand like the gravitas I was sitting on, the impact of my research, and how this was just all my own mind, right? And then what my observations were. And then yeah, and then that's kind of where it kind of landed. And I think for me it was from now it's like I've kind of transitioned from houseplants, horticulture to fieldwork, trade research, and I'm really at the point now, but asking those uncomfortable questions that I did in the past, and making these videos about plant influence versus horticulturalist stuff like that. Like it's just, now doing something which feels my own, and that's
Yeah, of
where
course.
I am.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. And it's nice to kind of see that transition that kind of happened there as well. And the fact that you get to live your dream. And I would imagine, ironically enough, based on a lot of people that are watching this, probably their dream as well.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see the realities as well there. Um, why was the actual shift so important to you to kind of move into that field as well?
Yeah, I mean, I remember this is a big question. And it's like sometimes not always like hard to and I think hopefully through my reels and Instagram more that I'm able to push that a bit forward a bit more. um so for me it was around like on the ground conservation work with the rural farmers and the plant hunters I met on the ground. For me it started from I'm also from a poor background, so I come from care, left care at 16. And for me, it's always been in my history of working in charities to really understand people from the margins and privileged backgrounds. For me, it really resonates with me. I understand the same struggles, I understand the same wants for a better life. I understand all that work, and I understand the kind of things in front of us that prevent us from doing that. So they understood that about me in a way that was easy to translate. Yeah, but I think it was just like, what I've learned from these people is that they generally care about their environments. the plants they're harvesting, and they want to make them more sustainable. They're fully aware of the plant trade. They're fully aware of the resellers and what's going on. They're pretty aware of the plant market, and everything like that. And they just want to do things better. But maybe they don't know how, or they haven't got the resource of infrastructure. That's what happens, right? But and at the same time, what really struck me when I was reading a lot of academic literature and the trade is that a lot of it focused on the legal trade and criminalization. So if you think about the ivory trade or like animal parts, you always see that in the news, and they call them poachers generally. The same kind of things apply to plant trade a little bit more, like orchids and stuff like that. So, but what I was seeing is the first-hand reality on the ground of these people trying to make a living, and a lot of it is like one plant can sell for a month's wages. So like we're demonizing these people, and that's what I was saying in the real world. And like what I also, and it's also about the conservation of these areas too. So many of these forests have been, they've been polluted. They've been, this new plantation being milled in as well. And then if they build a new like plantation schemes or silviculture, like replacement wood agroforestry, what happens is like they never think about the epiphytes. So there's like understory plants. It's all about timber products. And then they kind of forget about these small ornamental plants that actually used to live in these conditions. So it's always like trees or it's animals, right? And then in the conservation, like plant trade, it's criminalization and it's plants that are already protected. There's definitely like a real gap here of literature, which I was noticing. But what I also kind of found out that some of these solutions already existed. So there's a thing we call non-timber forest products, like coffee or fruit, which also, or honey, for example, they're all have sustainable harvesting with local communities. And this is just another forest product, which is also missing from the literature. So all I'm doing is kind of going, these are the gaps and this is the real world problems. But there is actually, in my Singapore botanical talk, I go much more detail into this, and I will share this as well. Hopefully tomorrow. This is the 17th.
Sure. If it's live before this goes, I'll kind of link it on this video as well.
I go into kind of what's really quite telling is another element of which I'm doing research on is the feedback loop. So essentially, a plant institutions, whether it's zoology or like animals or botanical institutions, collectors, the resellers, plant hunters, and also plant shops. It's a feedback loop going on, which is really impacting conservation. And the good example was in the Geographer magazine, which I was also featured in their latest thing. Another person wrote an article. I wrote an article about sustainable plant hunting and the necessity for plant conservations and the issues around the colonial legacies of plant hunting terminology and stuff like that. In the same article, a man who owns the World Garden in Kent, who's related to Miranda Hart, wrote about the romanticization of being kidnapped in Panama. And it was just kind of proved my point. And it was like, we kind of frame like plant hunters or the wilderness, these kind of unkept places, and, explorations of the Western can be the ones that are saving it, rather than that we remove the fact that local people, indigenous people have been looking after these, stewarding these lands for a long, long time, and they know these lands very well. So it kind of, it made me think about how, these people at the same time are demonized as well. And we let a lot of people along the supply chain off, and we kind of see them as saviors of these plants. So for me, the salvaging market comes through as well. Like, I rescued this plant from the wild because it's going to face forest destruction. It's like, how you don't know that? Like, they think that kind of, so I want to shift that value of nature dial a little bit, and it's kind of saying, these narratives, whether they're romanticized or commodified, still shape how plants are valued today. And that undermines conservation and legitimizes as well collection and the buying of these plants. So to me, that's what I want to shift.
It makes sense. It makes entire sense as well. And it's something that I've seen a lot of the times as well. Like the only plant that I can think of specifically that kind of there was a narrative behind it for a long period of time was the philodendron silver sword, basically, where they were just like, it's either threatened or almost extinct in nature. And it's kind of pretty much in most plant stores at this particular moment in time. It's also not the easiest plant to grow. So my point a lot of the times whenever that was coming up in conversation, I'm just like, there's a whole host of issues there to unpack, but at the same time, on the very basic level as to what you could be doing as somebody who is into the kind of hobby of houseplants, is make sure that you can keep that alive. Because if there's only a few specimens left and they are predominantly within the kind of houseplant world and lesser than being in nature, don't mess it up. Or if you can't do it, don't pick it up or don't encourage it, basically. And there's the interesting thing that you were saying about, because you're on the more front lines and you're seeing the people that are kind of the hunters that you were kind of mentioning as well. There's a lot, and I don't know how much of this you see within your world, but we see it from the kind of houseplant world as well, because there's a lot of people that will dogpile, basically. A lot of, every so often you'll get images of essentially what might be poached plants, usually on a table somewhere with no context. And then somebody starts going, yes, it's this business that's definitely doing this. And I'm just like, how? How do you know this, basically? Who told you this? Because that's the other thing that I always try to kind of look at it fuller, at least from my point of view, is you've got somebody saying somewhere that it's definitely this business. You don't also know that's for sure poaching because the images are blurry, they're not very clear, it's not sure what they're doing. And also, if the business that you're finger pointing towards, which could be kind of business espionage as well, or business kind of retaliation, has never done that. I work in the world of kind of digital marketing. When the bad press is out, there's no putting it back in, basically. Like if somebody claims that somebody's done something wrong, even if they haven't, and everybody dogpiles, there is nothing that entity can say to prove that they haven't done it, basically. Especially with something like this. So I'm just like, a bit more critical thinking with these things. It's obviously something that a lot of people feel deeply about, but is kind of getting the right tools in order to do that. That's very cool, kind of what you're seeing in that side of things. Do you mind if I kind of ask you a bit more of a follow-up on the kind of hunters that you were talking about there?
Yeah.
Because I know that you talk a lot about this as well on your side. And I think the distinction needs to be made about what you mean by hunters as well. Because is it people that used to poach, people that still poach, people that are not poachers that are doing this with kind of permits or whatever, that they're ticking all the right boxes? What do you mean by that exactly?
Oh yeah, term plant hunter is such a controversial term. I introduced my article like that. So it's I mean it's something that I've had to grapple with myself. And like, it's something that my friend Mikhail was like, don't use that term. And we had to talk about it, explain my reason why I do it. In terminology, Indonesians use the term plant hunter, or as we say, Penan and Pembero. So like it is something that they know is their word. They're very proud of it. I would be called a plant hunter in that context as well. But the issue is when we frame it around sort of the historical tropes of colonialism. And as I said, that article about that guy being kidnapped in Panama, when even locals don't go there, then it becomes real complex. So a plant hunter, there's different types of plant hunters. So you have a plant hunter who would just go out and he was told, could actually even be by a botanist, by the way, it doesn't matter. Could be someone who actually grows orchids professionally, will say, right, go out and I'll pay you this amount of money, go out and buy 50, get 50 of those, 100 of those. They might even not know if it might not be in flower, or they might know the leaf, what the leaf looks like, but they're just told there's a picture. They'll just grab them and take them. There's nothing sustainable about that whatsoever. Doesn't mean we should demonize them in the same way. The same thing could also be that there are plant hunters who have local nurseries who are very interested in finding new species, who are seen as a cash grab. And these are more the people that I work with because they have a model in place, right? And then there's also the people who are like, also resellers is another thing. So the resellers will tell people to go and get this plant and take it in the wild. So the other thing around plant hunters is that we might associate it with like animal trade or that kind of thing. And there's a very emotive things in that as well. So I can understand people get emotive about this subject because they think plant hunters, they think an ivory poacher, they think the same thing, which is why poaching is something that's really need to be unpicked as a language term, because it does demonize people and it has emotions, as I said, tacked to the animal trade, because people think of elephants. People thinking more about elephants, think about an orchid, that's the truth. And a lot of institutions like use the term poaching as well. So the problem with that terminology is that unless a plant's protected under CITES or in a conservation area, we can't say that plant's being poached. You understand? That's so when I talk about plant hunters, I'm saying they're collecting and harvesting from the wild, right? So these are people, and plant hunters also could be people who get, there's oud, which is the scented bark, which people make out the for Ramadan Muslims use. That's also a plant hunter will go out and find that specific thing. So in the context of that, what I'm trying to say is that I want to make plant hunting a sustainable tool for conservation because these are the people that know their landscapes. These are the people that could ethically source them. That's what I use in that context. Yeah, and I don't use poaching because it just demonizes people in a way.
And it
Yeah.
becomes what I was telling you before, that kind of witch hunt thing. It's a very emotive word one way or another. And you kind of describe that very well, that people might link it back to kind of the elephant tusk trade and all these things. So that kind of makes full sense. But do you have maybe any specific stories and examples that about some of the exact work that you're doing here that might be useful to people to kind of be aware of? So kind of if you were dealing with a specific plant hunter, or a specific species of plants, like how did that work and what did you see that the average person wouldn't see, basically?
I think, so the real story, really crux of my research, and I have data on this. So what we call known wild provenance, which is when a plant retailer or collector, not collectors, but they're selling, will add a provenance label. So provenance label would be Borneo, Peru, for example. And that normally indicates wild sourcing of that material, of that, right? We call it attribute. Now, in my e-commerce data for the last year, I'd say majority haven't. And there is evidence to suggest that, like, I won't go into the whole detail, but it's not always a price comparison difference, depending on the species. But what happens is you'll see plants sold with just SP. I'm sure you see this all the time. They are in plant shops, even in retailers in the UK, legitimate plant shops. But no one's stood there and gone, is that ethically sourced? Like, it just no one's having that conversation. So I think for me, it's around like, it's to me, and I got asked this question, how do I describe plant no more provenance? So no more provenance for me is like stamp collecting, or say you are someone who loves loves trainers, right? And you want to have the new colorways come out, and there's 10 colorways. You will buy every colorway, even though they are exactly the same shoe, they just have different colors. That's exactly how no provenance works. So they might have some variabilities of leaf pattern or flower color, but for taxonomic reasons, there's no scientific interest in this. They're just depending on environmental conditions. But as a collector, like that comes from now, I want it. And that links back to the kind of how we want to be close to nature. Another example would be in the real world complexes, there's Alocasia longibolia, which is a complex thing in itself because there's lots of variations of leaf on it. Now, it's sold out of Borneo as Westonia or Dove. It all could be called just Alocasia Dove, right? But the same species is sold from Sumatra as Prince of Chura, right? Because so these are things that people don't know because they think it's different and you speak. These things that I know, or they might change it to AF affinity of species or no ID. So kind of what's happening is this kind of changing of attributes and what sells, but no more provenance comes up. Another one example would be I saw someone online who's a seller. 1 week used the cinnamon of Hoya latifolia of a whole variegated plant with silvery for $1,000 because he knew that latifolia, if he sold it with latifolia name, would sell for less because it's too common, even though it's a cinnamon. It didn't work. So about a week later, he resold it with maybe the top 2 leaves cropped out. And then he sold it as species glabra from Calamantin. So he put weight on the provenance thing. So it's like, what I've kind of matters is like, these kind of values of nature and things like closely labeling is really important to the plant trade. But it really doesn't really get talked about. It kind of just sits through the net. So you're like, you might even, there's like legitimate plant shops who are like, they will buy things through the proper channels, like through and properly all the paperwork. and it will say it will say SP Papa on it, right? Doesn't, because it's not on CITES, right? But the other thing is e-commerce platforms as well, because they're not that good at monitoring plants. And I did some training to eBay, are also allowing plants to be traded. So like succulents are highly on CITES, but a lot of those plants are being bought and they're going through Etsy. And they're like, but no one goes, oh, is this plant coming from a conservation area? Oh, it doesn't matter. So like that's the things that I know a lot of people aren't aware of, that actually they could be buying plants unknowingly. They're actually being well sourced.
Yeah,
So,
and it kind of makes sense, and that's interesting because a lot of people wouldn't know that, and I cannot tell you how many people that I know that reach out, but they will only ever collect plants that are SPs or no IDs, basically, because for them it kind of, but it just kind of opens up this kind of Pandora's box as well, and the same thing happens with the naming, and that's why hopefully it's becoming more of a thing. I've tried to do it within my channel. I'm hoping other people will start to, where it comes to the kind of the amateur, not botanist, but actually bringing some of the botany, the language that's used for naming, the formatting as well, being able to distinguish between a hybrid, a species, an unknown, a no ID, and all these things makes a difference. And also trade names as well. And what you were saying before about the Hoya specifically, somebody actually mentioned this on one of my videos, not exactly this, but it was close enough, where there was a lot of people that were selling, shops as well, possibly not doing it intentionally, but they were selling Sunstressed Hoyas as something entirely different. And putting a price tag on it as well, because the average person wouldn't necessarily know. So it was good that somebody was saying, look, be careful that you're not buying a Sunstressed Hoya thinking it's something else when it's the same plant, it's just been sunstressed.
Yeah, I mean, I record this. I think, I hope you can't hear the beeps on my computer. Like, yes, like it's that red leaf. Yeah, I record all that as well, right? And I see what selling strategies are being implemented. I think I might be wrong, but I think even RHS, their plant labels, I think they've done some naughty stuff as well. So it's like, yeah, like I think there needs to, and this, so I'm on the International Aerial Society, so we do have a cultivars registry that I'm not part of it. I'm not part of that, but we've got some great people like Bill, who is our president. If we've got NES Tropicals involved in that as well. So these are the people that know better than me. And they can go through the list and go, and sell out. I do think we need more proper registration of plants. So I know one of my friends in Bulgur, he just got one of his hybrids of a Pacific Orchids register of RHS. I would love it if more of the international community, like the big institutions in across the West, and actually supported them, because actually they want to get these plants proper registered. They've created these hybrids and stuff like that, or get some real taxonomic names done and just get these IDs sorted, because it just will actually help scrutinize the plant. That's part of my work as well, to get these plant trade more scrutinized and say, hang on a minute, like that hasn't got a proper name. Why are we saying?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's interesting because I was talking to another scientist who wasn't necessarily a botanist, but I think the research that they were doing was more towards kind of small animals, basically, based in Australia. If they see this, by the way, hi. They were kind of saying, because we were talking about some of the naming as well, because there's a lot of kind of talk about the naming being very Westernized, it's Latinized, it's very much for the white man, basically. And a lot of the native communities that might have actual names for these plants and have had it for hundreds of years, that's not being represented. And he was saying, at least in his small part of the world, and it's not everybody, is that there's a lot of research teams now that are pushing for that. So he was talking specifically, there was somewhere, I can't remember which country in the Far East, basically, but it was one of the countries in the Far East, and they went to very kind of remote community within one of the jungles, basically, and they had a very specific type of mouse, I think it was there, but they had their own names for that. And it was undescribed mouse, I think that's what it was. And they named it after, they went through it, they had to jump through a lot of hoops, but they were able to get the naming to be that community's naming of that mouse that has been there for generations, which is the real way that it should probably be done.
Yeah.
In all fairness, like these things have names and they have cultural significance to a lot of the locations that they're based in. Why not kind of continue that name as much as possible? Obviously, changing every single botanical name out there might be a bit of a challenge right now, but at least moving towards something a bit more equitable would be good.
I think spending a lot of money and going backwards is also a problem. I mean, I understand the rationale behind it, but obviously we need money. I think spending money on conservation going forward is a much better tool. But I understand the understanding like racial term just like that. But one of the plants that I helped take to herbarium has got I asked him what should we call it, and he went, let's name it after the local mountain to discover. So it's going to have a local name, which is great. The new anaconda species that I found in South America that was featured on National Geographic, that actually had a local name. But when they published it, the so-called institutions, they said the scientists discovered it. So there's definitely a disconnect between the actual people. I know them as well, like the scientists on the ground. We do want to work with the local communities, but it's the institutions that need a little bit more of like, we didn't discover it, we just work with them. So,
Yeah, it was there before. We just happened to see it for the first time. But yeah, and it makes sense. And kind of bring it back into kind of a bit more the houseplants collecting and conservation. So how does the kind of the houseplant boom, and I know you were at that point, you weren't there researching because we talked about the 2020-21, the big boom that happened during COVID. But what impact did it have, if you know anything from what you're seeing on wild populations there?
It's kind of, for me, it's when it all kicked off. So that's when I was like, talking about like when I saw like it was during COVID, and there's some people suggest it slowed down a bit, but I think some of my analysis shows that it could just be seasonal changes. And obviously there's Jane Perrone, who also talked about, she had an article about Tesco, the houseplant market is actually not slowing down. So, I think the boom it's just changed gear, isn't it? I say that at the time there's a lot of plants that are taken from the wild without any scrutiny. That was the big problem, and what was happening before I arrived in Indonesia, my first trip, they said to me, foreigners are coming here, taking plants from the wild and then burning them afterwards. So a lot of the plants that you might think come from Indonesia, but are being sold by neighboring countries were taken from this country, Indonesia. So there is a big problem with that side of it as well. And there's a lot of demonization that goes on between them as well. So you might think, oh, I'm going to buy my plants from Thailand because, they're reputable. Well, then ask yourself, how did they get hold of those plants in the first place? That's a big problem. And also the trade of plants resources in South America is not a new thing. We've only got back to the Dutch Indies. Some of those plants from South America have appeared in the Far East, and they're being propagated up for a reason, and that's because of trade, and people have lost their plants. So that's what was going on, and that's why I said to sit there as a plant influencer at a time and say we don't know these plants are being poached is rubbish. These plants came from somewhere, and they just didn't appear as a new product on the market and no ID for no reason. So I think just to move it, I think what's happening now is with the plant shops now is that the more plants are entering plant shops, and they all, and as so for example, the Monstera variegata, and then Thai Constellation. I know the guy that introduced Thai Constellation to the mass market, and we had this conversation last year, very controversial. Plants get cheaper, don't they, to propagate, and anthuriums as well. Anthuriums are going to they're easy to propagate. Some of these plants actually had very recently wild sourcing. And that's the issue that I think is the shift we have to think about now, is that boom is now fueled a wider plant market, which will appear in supermarkets. And we're not saying they're going, where do these plants originally come from?
And and that's important as well, because I think a lot of people forget that even if you look at some of the common plants that have been around for decades, I'll take a very, very obvious, simple example. A pothos plant didn't jump out of nature into somebody's truck in the turn of the century to then become a house plant. At some point, those plants were taken as well out of that at this point, but nobody was having these conversations back then.
You know where that comes from, don't you? Epipremiorium, don't you?
That's from one of the islands, isn't it?
Wow. Comes from one island.
Yeah, and then, it was a very specific island.
The Dutch Indies made it go everywhere.
Yeah, that's just it, basically. And it's impressive considering that it will grow like a weed in pretty much most countries.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that's something that is worth kind of discussing and people kind of keeping kind of front of mind as well. And when we're kind of looking at, because you're seeing this a bit more, and again, this is more of an emotive word. This is up there with the kind of poaching side of things. When you look at ethical and unethical kind of sourcing, is that something people should be looking at? Can they tell the difference? What should people that are kind of houseplant collectors be aware of if they really want to make a difference?
So yeah, so obviously there's that kind of there is that wild source tags, right, which a lot of plant collectors use, which which is the no wild provenance tags. That will if the plant has been on the plant market for a while. So let's just say using silver swords, for example, right? Right, that's been propagated loads now. So you can, if it's a new thing on the market, no ID, new described, just described, hasn't had a chance to propagate up, especially with some of the slower growing plants like Hoyas or your slipper orchid. It takes 2 generations, by the way, for a slipper orchid to be CITES compliant.
Oh, interesting. Did not know that.
Yeah, that's 2 generations of slipper orchids. And it has no wild problem, then you're like, yeah, I shouldn't be buying that. You should scrutinize it. I think it's the problem is unless it's on CITES, there is no universal, certification of ethical versus unethical sourcing at the moment. And it's kind of, as I say, unless it's on CITES, depending on 1 or 2, it hasn't got much protection. So, for example, I've seen one of the Pemper species that's on CITES 2 sold as seeds online from the area it's from, which is the national park, and the online platforms aren't doing anything about it. So you can't just presume that the online platform that you're shopping on is going to do the scrutiny compliance for you. I know this because I did trainings at eBay, and they were learning from us, and they are doing better. But a lot of these kind of smaller other platforms, say local platforms, aren't doing that. Where I live now, they don't even have a plant reporting mechanism. It's only for the animal trade. It was this is clearly a breach of international law. Let's report it. And I used it and I got it removed. But it just shows you that it's another thing is someone that said to me is that, I bought these plants from a seller in Indonesia and I had mosses and lichens on it. I'm not doing that again. Now, to say if that's ethical and unethical would be not right for me to say that, because they just probably don't have the knowledge to do that. And also a reseller downstream could just remove it. You wouldn't know. And there's a terminology that gets thrown like cloned material. Now in horticulture, cloned means under control conditions and it's propagated. In the plant collector market, clone can just mean they just took a cutting from the tree. And they think it's ethical. No, it's not. We don't know that. So it's understanding what the plant is being sold to and having that question. So I think for me, it's the best tools I could always say is green. The best tools I could say is if you're going to a plant shop, right? Your everyday plant shop, which a lot of me listeners probably go to, and you see a plant sold with Peru, for example, or Papua, why not have a conversation with that person and say, how do you know it's sustainably sourced? That I would encourage that. The other thing would be definitely what I'm trying to advocate for is basically existing schemes like fair trade principles. So the SIA berry or the that actually there's a community forest management scheme in Brazil. It's been certified by the Forest Stewardship Council. So for me, that's the mechanism I'm going down to get stamp approval using known wild provenance and other seller code. Use that. Until we're at that point, we have to kind of do a lot of our own kind of asking sellers for the proper paperwork, really these conversations to be more ethical, because at the moment, unless it's on CITES, those mechanisms don't exist. But even with CITES, don't assume that it's ethically sourced as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and I think people are getting a bit more kind of aware of this. I've had this conversation on my channel a few times. We're going, okay, so stripping it back to the kind of basics for people, it's just so you did not know this plant existed. It wasn't anything big until an influencer told you about this potentially. And all of a sudden you're getting fully mature specimens from growers that you think is something that they've just happened to have. They kind of had a crystal ball 10 years ago when they should have started growing this plant because it's a slow grower, for example, to say, okay, in 10 years' time, there's going to be a random influencer somewhere online where the plant boom is going to happen again, to say this is a plant that we need to grow, let's grow this large and then sell it. A bit of critical thinking there. Like my humblest of opinions, it's obvious with the really, really big specimens, and it's really obvious with the established big specimens, especially if you know it's a slow growing, because it's just like, there is no way, if this plant takes 6 to 7 to 10 years to get to that size, how? Even with squinting and imagining hard enough, it's not going to be
Yeah.
something that's just naturally happened. It could be, there's the odd occasional one that could happen, basically. And it's interesting because the trends are different as well. And I know this isn't necessarily something that was a species necessarily from nature, but when the big boom happened with something like the pink princess, that started off as a mutation, I think, on a couple of plants people had in nurseries that they thought was god awful and ugly, and they never did anything with it. And it's only when people started to kind of go, oh, what is that? And then they started, and that's kind of how that spiraled out. But it's a matter of taste and it's a matter of trends, unfortunately, to kind of, but it's kind of giving the people the tools of, like what you were saying as well, like ask the questions of the people, be a bit more critical when you're seeing things like this, look at the sourcing. If you've got any kind of way of seeing some provenance yourself, do this. People should be checking out sites as well. Just to kind of make sure that what they're getting is kind of something that they are comfortable with as well. So actually, and is it sites or is it CITES?
CITES.
CITES.
Conservation of International Trade in Endangered Species and Wildflower, Fauna and Flora. But it's a mouthful. But I think the good examples, I know succulents and cacti are really popular, right? So a lot of them are on CITES, right? So I would then say, for example, if you see a plant that you want to buy on eBay, right, which or like another collector, check if that plant's on CITES, and then ask about the paperwork. Really scrutinize it, because, as I say, online platforms don't necessarily ask them for permits, and it does happen in that trade. Where those plants aren't on site is a little bit more complicated and stuff like that. But then again, don't always just demonize someone and say, oh, it's a pig with mosses. Like, oh, it's really bad what I buy. Because as I say, resellers can do stuff. But the difference is that a cultivated plant in a nursery is always going to look different from a plant from nature, because, you don't give it fertilizers and it's going to have, but that's in a way what I've got to work with the system. And that's why I feel you could do ethical sourcing with these plants and give the plant market what it wants.
So, no. And that's just it as well. I mean, even simple things in terms of the appearance of plants. If something is an aroid, for instance, and it's prolific with aerial roots and it was taken from nature, ask yourself the question, potentially, if it's a large plant, like, why are all the aerial roots missing? What was this attaching to in order for it to get this big?
Yeah.
If it was something as innocuous as a moss pole that the grower had, why didn't it's simpler for them to just send you the moss pole?
I think you talking about philodendron microcyclium, those big ones, or the shields. Yeah. I mean, you could do that by fertilizer, but I think it's just showing that, and also the flowering, like maturity and stuff like that. It's just making people aware of these sort of questions, and but that's another thing that have you seen this in some of you might have small form versus large form, and then people will buy the small form thinking it's different, and eventually it converts into what the plant should look like.
That's up there with the Sunstressed for me. It's a bit like, so you just got a young plant.
Or it says in the taxonomic literature, the floral part or specific can be between this millimeter or centimeters or leaf margins. Because they haven't read it, but it doesn't look in their view as it doesn't look like what I normally see. It's got smaller flowers. It must be a new species. They put AF on it, and then it just becomes, that's another thing. So it's just kind of maybe as a collector's thinking, is that actually a new species? Yeah, it's having a think about it, because as I say, do you really want 10 sneakers that have maybe potential different colorways? That's essentially what you're buying. They all could actually, but what the difference between a sneaker is, your plant could eventually change into the other plant. They all look the same because you're going to give them the same growth conditions.
And that's just it, basically. But it's good for people to kind of be aware of that. But so talking about CITES, so some people, a lot of people probably won't know what that is to begin with. But like, do you want to just give a brief explanation? I know you're not a representative of CITES, but like why it matters, what it does, and what it doesn't cover potentially, so that people kind of know
Yeah,
when we're
well,
looking at it.
my supervisor, Dave Roberts, is a big person in the illegal wildlife trade, so I've got to make sure, I'm speaking in a very diplomatic term. But I know I like it's so they do cover they're basically it is a global agreement of the regulate the trade of species from extinction. So it's like trading principles, right? So for example, these are the people who are like make sure that like you might hear stories of they have conventions each year and that kind of thing, and it's and they will say things like they will stop like animal parts being traded or transmission medicine or monkey head stuff like that, like skulls, that sort of thing. But if plants are a little bit more like you're not always reported, so but it is really heavily critiqued for reasons which I agree with. So it does. So if a plant's on CITES Appendix 1, which is the most like scrutiny, which I said slipper orchids or cacti, some of them, or I think monkey puzzle, the monkey puzzle tree, that's on Appendix 1. What that will mean, yeah. So it's so but if say Papapedium, it's Papapedium slipper orchid species, right? If you discover a new species of Papapedium, and you were like, I really want to share this with my research partner in Singapore or London, good luck. Because that's what it does. It does restrict information sharing between researchers. And what that has allowed to happen is that the underground market of illegal trading. And what that does, and those people will legitimize and say, well, I'm doing good work because CITES doesn't do it for me. So I need to trade these plants to keep it alive in nature. So what it has done is legitimize some of the legal trade. And there's been evidence, research to suggest that putting a plant on CITES increases its value of wild collected plant. So that's why there's a lot of kind of, there's a lot of evidence yes, it does drive over harvesting. And then obviously there's plants that aren't protected. So and getting a plant put on CITES is really difficult. And I'm not saying that I want all the plants I'm researching on CITES, right? But it's working with the botanists and researchers saying what's the best approach going forward, because blanket protection has been proven not to work on the site, and it's been proven in the e-commerce trade, which is kind of an area that's really under research, and that's why a lot of people working in the wildlife trade are turning that area. So like, I've read papers on tarantulas, I've read papers on lizards, like turtle eggs, like it's a thing. Facebook Marketplace, Instagram, these are things that CITES just doesn't really investigate. It's more about the other type of trade, which is more traditional trade. So really what I'm really focusing on is like presenting that work to them, and and saying these are some of the issues that we're facing, these are some of my recommendations, and then maybe work with them to do more sustainability changes to that system. Because the good thing about CITES is that they're a global force. So I could turn around and say, right, I want to work with guys in South America, let's do this a bit more. Or my research into, even though it's based on the tropics, I also could say, right, I know that, wild tulips are harvested, those, orchids which are used in tea, they also, so I could use it to do more temperate climates as well and apply the same principles. So it's a great networking tool at the same time. But as I just illustrated, it's not without its
Yeah, of
criticism.
course. And I think that's a
That
good
was
thing. That's a good thing for
dramatic.
people to know. But no, that's a good people to, I mean, I didn't know that. And it kind of, when you explain it, it makes full sense that would kind of almost create that undermarket from happening as well. And that's something that, yeah, it's interesting. Because that was never the
Yes.
intentions of CITES. It was almost the entirely opposite thing, but it by
Yeah.
default caused some of that as well.
Yeah, so I can't speak for animals because I'm
Yeah,
not
of course.
that
Yeah.
person. So you can have CITES Appendix 1 and you read it. So sipper orchids, it will say only if it's like you can prove it's second generation, you can trade it. And then you go to Appendix 2, and then they have their own different lights, what it means per thing. And then you have 3, which just means, I think 3 is national protection. So that's potentially when a country needs to do more to help with trade. It doesn't mean you can't internationally trade it. I probably would prefer that one. in a way. But yeah, you have to really read each detail of each animal or plant, in scrutiny to do it as well. Because I think training of animals is a little bit more easier. Like,
Yeah,
is it an animal? Is it not? Plant, what generation is it?
yeah.
It's a
It
little bit
starts
more
getting
complex.
layered at that point.
Yeah.
No, and it kind of makes sense. But I think bringing it back to what we would like, what kind of instigated us doing this interview together, me doing the previous video, was an original post that you did on Instagram, which I thought was hugely interesting. And I'm hoping you got more people I saw a few people in the comments that engaged, but what did inspire you to call out the plant influencers on Instagram?
Well, I mean, it isn't my first time I've done this, is
No,
it?
but it's good.
Do you remember when I did those plant influencers versus horticulturalists?
Yes, it was great. I loved those videos.
I can't believe they went that viral. It was just ridiculous. And they just stopped going viral. I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
doing anything. No, I was just after about 5, I got a bit bored of them. It was getting a bit repetitive. But I think for me, it was these big like accounts, we're talking, even some have millions, right? Aren't horticulturally trained. And that's not important, or they haven't got like a long history of like working in the field or like, and they're giving misleading advice. A good example would be, I've just seen it recently. Do you follow I think it's called the Black Botanist or something, or Chocolate Botanist?
I think so. I've heard. I don't think I
Yeah,
follow, but yeah.
Chocolate Botanist is a good one because he's doing what I used to do. But like, he's a good one because he just did one with a guy who's like did the zany kind of reels, got probably millions of followers, about banana peel. Banana peel fertilizer does not work. Banana tea, like just put it in your compost heap, let it, that's what we all say. But these people are, and the other one was like always the variegated Sansevieria and propagating it, and then they show it and it's like reverted. These counts are
Yeah.
making money off misleading information
Information, yeah. And
because
that's
they
just
have
it, basically.
followers.
Yeah.
So, and then, and what might seem harmless is actually people like you, I would say, people like you really care about what you do, don't have the same followers, and actually deserve the profit. You know what I'm getting at, right? There's even garden writers who they deserve the profit, not these people. So they just regurgitating price. And then what really laid onto it was he's a British personal trainer, lives in Scotland, he's got like a bald head, whereas a cat. You might have seen him as well. He has started doing about like health accounts. The first one I saw was there was a woman doing a TED talk who was described as who is this cave woman? Don't eat vegetables. And again, she has 500,000 followers, right? Doing a TED talk, telling people not to eat vegetables. That is dangerous, right? Last year, there was all these beauty influencers saying to people, don't put sunscreen on. Like, it's like, and so it's not, I was getting inspired by that. I think it was that the nutritionist, he's a personal trainer, but then, what I was looking at is that people in my field. So there's a friend of mine called Sean. He's the botanist guy from Indonesia. I have talked about this concept, so I'm not shaming him publicly, but he had gone to a nursery in a Pentis nursery. These are the tropical pitcher plants in Singapore. The plant seller has said to him, Nepenthes cleopatra is functionally extinct in the wild. That is a load of BS because functionally extinct is really hard to prove and there's a lot of gaps in the data. I even shared it with my supervisor, was like, there's a study on this, right? But what that he had done was took the words of a seller, shared it on his big platform for people to believe. That potentially has legitimized the people that live in West Kalimantan to go and take the rest of it. Oh, it's dead anyway. But that's also been backed up by another carnivorous plant, a botanist, who says that same habitat is actually a conservation area. Oh, plant hunting is not its threat. It's actually, plant hunting is its threat. It's not forest degradation. And then, you'll see other content creators like talking about certain things like, what does this wild form mean, or this, without the context of what's happening. So again, it's very similar to like a beauty influencer or like saying don't put it's not scientifically accurate. And then obviously what's happening with Donald Trump, some of your viewers might agree with it, but for me, what's happening, he's He hates climate change. He doesn't like the wokeness of climate and biodiversity. Some of my friends, colleagues have lost their jobs. My boss is here in Indonesia, has lost 2 of his grants. You know, there seems to be a sway across America to demonize biodiversity and just they're going to cut down more of their trees. You have our UK government seems to go, hi, Thames Water, just keep polluting rivers. We have, you know, like it is true what's happening. Like they seem to be shifting away from this and funding it less. The West seems to be going this way. And it's scary for me as someone who works in science that we are now being told that we make things up. Like it's scary, right? But who has the biggest platform right now? Influence. So really, it really wasn't really like a call out to say, look, I'm saying to you guys, you have an amazing platform and you need to be more accountable of what you're saying and also evidencing it more. Because if you're taking the words of a seller, right, how do you know that's true? Right? And also, and then there's another one. I mean, there's another big influence from America. She was talking about a plant that was potentially with a houseplant collector in New York. Potentially, that plant's been illegally sourced from Etsy. But it's just that kind of a lack of awareness of what you're pushing out and the impact that has on the field. So for me, it was saying to you, and I'm really glad you invited me to this talk. And I think it's great to interview me for this because I think it's a good example of what people are doing it right. What I'm saying to you is the community, the influencer community, is like, I really listen to what you're being said. Is it factual? If not, find out from someone. Even ask me, and I can find out for you. The other thing is as well, really give people like me a platform. I know some amazing botanists, conservationists, researchers that want to talk about their work. And actually, you might say, oh, but then people are not interested in this topic. Okay, then why don't you make it about the houseplant as well? Let's about anthuriums. Let's bring in anthurium botanists on board because you can do. And I think that's what we need to start doing. I just want these plant content creators to really be more accountable and just lift us up more because I don't think the governments are going to do it anymore.
No. And to be fair as well, and I've always kind of said this as well with people, whether they're influencers, whether or not they're just random John or Jane Smith online kind of going, oh, but even when you're looking at instructions on how to care for this, and I'm just like, because it's the same one seller that's kind of replicated this on all these different websites. I know for everybody, and I've said this before, I come from a science background as well. Granted, mine was human anatomy. And I know,
impressive.
I know that like scientific literature can be dry for a lot of people who are not scientists. I get it. But that for at least for plants, that is possibly going to be the best source of information. It also means that if you're in those scientific articles, you're more likely to then maybe look around and find out a bit more. That's an easy way to get into it because even if you're just looking, why does my monstera that everybody says to do this is not working? Go and see a scientific article, see where it comes from, see its conditions, its habitat, and all these things. And whilst you're there, maybe have a look around at some of these scientific articles and find out a bit more about the kind of the situation as a whole, basically. So hopefully things are happening. I would take your kind of call out to influencers a step more and just kind of say, do more than just a message on a note somewhere saying, oh yes, I agree, this is really important to be talked about, and do nothing afterwards. It's like, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. All you've done is given your ego a bit of a stroke and showed your followers that, look, I care. But do you really? Because all you did was write a message that took you 2 seconds, basically. Take a bit more, do a bit more. You're right. We've got platforms, rightly or wrongly, and I'm with you on this one as well, because sometimes it's a shame. It is a crying shame that a lot of the kind of botanists aren't getting the spotlight, not because they need the spotlight, but they kind of should have the spotlight to talk about and give them the platform that they need in order for people to learn these things. And it's interesting that you mentioned this because you talked about the International Arrow Society. And I know from a while back, this might be a controversial topic, but I know from a while back before the big boom again, and there was kind of comments that were made that, look, the International Arrow Society, there was a lot of scientists that used to go to there. It was a much smaller thing like that. I'm thinking even the event that happens in Florida, for that one. A much smaller event. It was essentially a lot of slightly older white dudes and white ladies that were going there and kind of getting into this. And all of a sudden, this has become a much bigger thing to the kind of audiences. And it's telling to see something that used to be more scientific has now getting some of the stalls that are getting influencers to come and sit there and talk there. But hopefully the people, I have not been, I would love to go to one of those events at some point in my life. So it'd be really interesting to see if that's still got its roots in the science of it all, or if it's just become a big marketplace at this point.
So yeah, I am now officially the co-chair, but might just be the chair of the education committee now. So I was nominated last year, so I officially started my tenure this year, so 3 years. I would hope that I was recruited because of that, the conservation and the rigor I bring. I know from my colleagues on the board that they share that sentiment with me. I am really keen to kind of start. While our big focus is, I'm developing an educational strategy at the moment. So when I'm saying calling people out, or you might say calling out, making people accountable, I'm also doing it myself. So I want to actually develop the tools. Just to step back a little bit, so institutions that I would say RHS, I think it's one of the best tools for getting plant care tips for majority of plants that they're on there, right? It's very easy to understand. They don't use indirect light. They explain what that lighting needs, right? And they give you the growth habitats. So I would say that is a good one. I think where things do get a bit awry with the information that we're looking at is that it sometimes can be dumbed down too much. And I think a good example was the Gardening Illustrated video reel I saw recently, where she made a mistake where she was talking about basically one of I can't remember what they're called. Basically, you don't propagate that plant doing a stem cutting it through division, but she just grouped them all together as philodendrons with, it's one that makes pups, and it's one of the old it's white and green leaf. I remember it's called one of the oldest house plants you can get, but by the plant, yeah. But it's even they make mistakes. So it's I think even the people that we look up to make mistakes. So I'd say that's stepping back, and even the International Aerial Society has made some mistakes as well. So it's recognizing that fact. I would say that it's responding to the market. So at the moment, aeroids are probably the biggest collector market we have. And one of my goals for developing the educational strategy is to really address the beginners. So the people who are entering the collector market, who are just at the start, who want to build their collection past the profiles, as you say, or the Scindapsus, looking to more kind of exciting, bigger leaf philodendrons or, anthuriums, but also recognizing the intermediate or advanced market need to be cared for as well. So developing more talks with them as well. So we are going through a shift, I think, at the moment. But yeah, I want to call it out as well and say in the UK, I don't think something like the Marvin show, I never see people like me being asked to talk there. I want to call it out as well. I really do.
Because it needs to be one of those things that, unless you're front and center and talking about it, it's very easy for people to entirely forget or don't even know that it exists, basically, as an issue, basically. Yeah. So I think it's important.
Thanks for your feedback on the International Aerial Society. That's a very good point, and thanks for that.
It's one of those things, because I think even I was doing some research from what they my earlier days, and again, scientific background, yeah, so I could read a bit more than the average person who hasn't got a science background. And I remember reading, and some people would just go to the International Aerial Society, they've got loads of information on their website. Oh wow, they do, but most of this doesn't make any sense. And I think it would be good to have somebody like you're kind of doing what you're doing now, because even the fact that you separated the beginners, intermediates, the more advanced, kind of the seasoned people, is a huge step forward, because they need to be kind of addressed in a different way. They understand things in a different way. It needs to be kind of set up that way, just to make it accessible to everybody. Because at the same time, we're always really good at thinking about, let's dumb it down in quotes to the beginners, but at the same time, if that information is going for somebody who's advanced, is it too dumbed down that it switched them off entirely? And they just consider it as too fluffy of content, basically. Do they need a bit more? So even the awareness that there needs to be tiers to this will make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, because in my recent Singapore Botanical talk, I tried to do the intermediate level because I knew it was public engagement. But I should be talking in Miami. I haven't been. I think I am in September. I'm going to make it really exciting exploration, but I've got to and I've really got to think about the audience there. I probably have to go to, entry to intermediate and just be respectful because to me, it's accessible, but also respectful for people's knowledge. As you said, like you came from not animal, human science background. You clearly have a tendency level, but doesn't mean I'm going to dumb it down for plants for you. It's just be respectful to people.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing as well. But so is there any way that either the influencers or their audiences can help support with conservation or shift towards conservation as well? Because I know a lot of people want to do it. I attempted a bit on the video that I did after your call out, but is there other areas that you think that people should be focusing on? I think I mentioned CITES and a few others, but is there anything that you kind of have seen firsthand are good or the place to start?
So I would start with your video was great. Like you did something in a very compound and collect. And I saw the comments. I thought, yeah, that's really good that you've got that response. So well done to you there. It's a difficult thing to probably even script, probably.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was surprised that it had that much viewership. If I'm being honest, I was fully expecting. I'm just like, for a lot of people, it's a bit of a dry topic. They don't necessarily want to see it. I didn't expect that to do well, but I had to do it for my own conscience, if that makes sense, because it needed to be out there. And I'm bowled over by how many people it resonated with, which is good.
So yeah, I think you just got good delivery. So I would say, but I've got my content on my Instagram is always a good segue into things. I think it's a good way of actually finding out what resources you could look at as a first kind of introduction to that as well. I'd say I've also at the moment got a choice experiment, which I could also show you the QR code you can put on the screen now. But you also go to Instagram as well, because that's a way that you as a viewer to this can take part in a survey if you're a collector of Hoyas or anthuriums, Puffapalliums, to actually do something that could actually benefit my research and pilot projects, make it more sustainable. That's a good way you can be more involved, because people ask how to kind of get more involved in this. The things that I'd always look at is the red list, the IUCN, that go on there. Now it hasn't everything and it's not a hard list, but just to give you an idea of how we assess things. And also some of the animals on there as well. You can learn about conservation just more broadly and the areas and what's going on, how we assess those criteria as well. There's a thing that I look at, which is the International Tropical Timber Organization. Now it's called ITTO. Now they lean more on non-timber forest products like coffee, fruit, and the acai berry I talked about, and they do a lot of monitoring schemes. There's some case studies there you can look about, and some of the trade-offs between how communities have to have their timber they burn for cooking or versus growing this plant as a fruit and making a profit. So you learn a bit about that. CIFOR, which is Centre for International Forest Research, which is across the tropics, which is a really useful tool as well. And then Traffic, which is traffic, all capital letters. They do, as I said before, look along the global trade of wild animals and plants. They did a partnership with Q. So they're doing a lot of work on that. Again, they do more on the criminality work, and work that gives you an idea of what's going on there. And then Botanic Gardens Conservation International. So obviously they've got an office just outside of Kew, but they work with all the kind of botanic gardens across the globe and kind of do some research from them. So they do a lot of reports. So it gives you an idea what's happening globally in the field as well.
Nice. That sounds really good. And that's really good kind of resources. I'll see if I can find links to all these and add them at the bottom of the video just to make people's lives a bit easier as well. And just to kind of start wrapping up, kind of maybe some takeaways for the audience. So any practical things that can do, how can they maybe support some ethical sellers, how to learn a bit more? Obviously, you mentioned some of the organizations there, but anything you kind of want to add as to practical kind of side of things?
Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, please do the choice experiment. That's good for me. That's a practical thing you can do. I would probably say, I've said this before. So you are going into a plant shop, right? And you might have the most blank stare back to you because that person might be like, I just work here. But please just ask them and say, this says species Papua Borneo. Is this been ethically sourced? And then, oh, I don't know. Then have a conversation with them and say, did you know this? Because it just creates a wave in the community to get people go, I didn't know about that, or it could even be an RHS website. I don't care. Actually, just make a comment because the more we get people talking about these issues, the more that we actually start saying we actually get people accountable in the trade, right? And we think about where this terminology comes from. It's the same with cloning or poaching. Just say to people, I watched this video, I want to challenge you on that. That's a practical way of getting people to start thinking differently about how we talk about these things as well. I think the other thing is as well, if you are a collector who loves shopping on eBay, for example, or Etsy, don't assume these platforms do the work for you. They're not like a houseplant shop. I just explained to you that's also a scrutiny.
That's got its own issues there.
Yeah, but e-commerce platforms are a high for people to sell internationally from these forests or resellers. So just ask them and say, what paperwork do you have on this? Can I see it? Because if they say they've got a phyto certificate, they should be able to show you before. Ask for a picture of that plant. If it has mosses and lichens on it, then ask them, okay, ask some more questions. Where does plant come from? Because if they can't tell you, then there's something dodgy about that, and then you like doing it. The other thing is as well, if the plant is newly described, like a new species, no ID, definitely well sourced, right? And I'll tell you now, if you wait a couple of years, not only will it be cheaper, but it's more likely being propagated up, and I've probably got more time to work on it. But it's those kind of things that just slow down your purchasing, right? This must-have status thing, is expensive. It drives over harvesting and that kind of thing. And I think it's also, if the more and more plants are sold with no more provenance, it makes people in these countries go, oh, I can take more from the wild, which is why I'm trying to flip it and make it sustainable. So I think these are the practical things that we all can do. And also, please do keep calling out influencers online. Don't be afraid. Like, I get blocked by them, but I think it's just saying to them, like, you know what, that's not right, what you're saying. I think you should refer them to someone else. Because the more that we get those big voices in that field and say, actually, I don't think you should talk about conservation more. I think you should do that, because it encourages them to make that content. I think they're a little bit scared to make it because maybe they don't know the right people, or they think that their audience don't care about this stuff. And I do think we actually do. We want to see these plants in the wild. We want to see forests. We want to see where these plants come from. And just to say, lean on, I think people want to look at nice plants all the time. I think that's an excuse. And I think we need to support content creators saying, actually, make content like this.
Yeah, and 100%. And that's the big thing. And even what you were saying about people having that conversation with the stores as well, or the shops that they're going into, it makes sense because that's how you would instigate change anywhere. Like a very simple kind of human experiment side of things. If every single person that goes into that plant store asks that same exact question, even if they do not have the answer, even if you've kind of tried to educate them, guess what it will probably mean for that business is very quickly they'll be like, oh, so this is something that people care about. Maybe I should know the answer to this or have something ready for this. But that won't happen unless it happens in mass, basically.
Yeah.
So the more people that are out there doing this, you're right, with a lot of influencers kind of using those platforms to kind of give that kind of information that's needed, even if you're right, a lot of people might be uncomfortable because they don't know it themselves. Get somebody, reach out to some scientists. I reached out to you, like reach out to people out there. As you said, they are probably more than happy to provide information, do interviews, do all these things. Even the scientists that don't want to be on camera, they will give information because it kind of aligns with what they are truly passionate and doing day in, day out.
Yeah, and then just people who are organizing events, I think, it's nice to have these houseplant tours and these shows, stuff like that. But there are not just me, but there are some amazing people working on the ground, and they might be shy and retiring people, but it could actually bring a different lens to what you're talking about. Like these are orchids in the wild. These are I mean, I just spent the week with a tropical fern botanist. Like he is amazing, right? He's doing the herbarium stuff. There are some really cool scientists out here doing some amazing work, and they would love. I'm sure they would love to talk to the houseplant enthusiasts. So don't forget about us, these organizers,
Yeah,
because
no,
you know,
100%.
yeah.
100%. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people don't know this. I can't remember who it was. I met a botanist about a year or two ago, and I remember it was around when everybody was still talking about rare plants and all these things, and going somewhere like in a botanical garden. And the rare plants that we class as rare were really not for this individual. And he found like
Red
this
list.
randomest, the randomest little fern that was kind of, if you would have been excused to think it was a weed somewhere within the plants. And I have never seen somebody get so excited. It was like a 5-year-old that was just given a lollipop going, oh my God, I've just seen this plant. And this plant only is endemic to this one little bit. And I've never personally seen it, but I'm seeing this, and I'm just like, see, take note, that's a rare plant.
That's a rare plant.
That is a rare plant. The one that will get the actual scientists that excited, because there is zero chance anywhere else that they would ever come across this. And they've managed to see this tiny little thing that you thought might have been a weed. Really kind of eye-opening at that point. That is a rare plant.
The red list is what we mean by rarity.
Yeah.
And that's something else I want to call the plant trade out. Stop calling plants rare.
Yeah, there's a lot of us that are trying to stop that.
Cultivated plant, I understand, like you want to call them like rare on the market, but I can tell you now, there's many of these aroids that I just left in nurseries waiting for the market to be more
100%.
saturated.
100%.
Rarity means nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't. And it was something that kind of instigated the market a bit more. But yes, I think that was everything that I kind of wanted to touch on. Is there anything you wanted to say before we kind of like wrap up, and I can let you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, I think, over there?
Yeah, it's gone 5 o'clock. So yeah, I guess it's a question for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So where do you've been making plant content for a while? Yeah. So what do you think your next trajectory is going to go next? Because
it's whether I'm going to take this full time, right?
I'm just asking,
No. Honestly, I do not know. There's the very real reality of at least the little niche of the world. And to be a bit more kind of honest, and I think people will start seeing this, is going to be less and less influencers, because of the very black and white thing of this is it's not profitable for a lot of people anymore. I'm fortunate enough that I have another business, and this was always a passion project to me. Like, it's not anything that's going to make me millions and millions of pounds. I know other people have tried as well. But for myself, I would love to get a bit more into the educational side of things.
Nice.
I have never classed myself as an influencer. I think I'm more comfortable with the term content creator. I don't spend an awful lot of time on my channel saying, buy this or buy this. And I said, I work in digital marketing. I do that for other people all the time. And the last thing I want to do is do that outside of my own platform. If I ever mention a product that I like, it's because I actually like it. But yeah, I think probably more on the educational side of things. I think I do really enjoy doing more talks and events and kind of educating people. Again, more of the scientific things, but in ways that they can understand it. So kind of talking about things like gutations in plants, but talking about it in a way that your plant is sweating. Why is it sweating? And that's something that people can easily understand. And I always find it doesn't matter how complicated the subject is. If you can bring it to everybody's simple reality at whatever level you're talking, that information goes in immediately, basically, because it's very quick for them to kind of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I've seen that before. But I think that for now, I would love to do what you were doing. If I was brave enough to kind of do that, I would love to go back into like kind of the more science side of things and go into botany. I don't know.
There's a whole life ahead of you still. So.
I know. It'd be another career change. I've changed my career and business about 8 to 10 times already so far. So you never know, it might happen.
Well, with my educational strategy, which I've already kind of shared some indicators with my colleagues, there is a plan to invite people to write for us. So now that you've told me that, I will maybe contact you in the future.
Yeah,
I do think it's nice to actually hear from our community more about topics that are in, like always like, journalistic comments, like saying, did you know about this? Like, it's almost like not had to be, but I think that's a good idea. I think it's just getting our community in the aerial society to actually say, let's talk about plants more. But yeah, I think you've got a good way forward. And I was the same, like I'm funded now, right? And before I was having 2 jobs. So now like I'm funded to do this and I don't see my content as profitable. It's just getting my message out there. And I'm not, people say, are you a content creator? I'm like, no, I'm a scientist. But I mean, I'm just, and there's someone, and I'd love to share what I do. And I think it's really important. And my funders are really happy to do that. So yeah.
And that's the important thing. Yeah. Anything else?
I can't, yeah, just good. But yeah, keep up the good work.
I meant to you too, obviously. But again, a big thank you to you for your time. I know that you're kind of flying all over the place and to do the work that you do. Thank you for coming on and talking to us. Also, for any of the audience, if I'm going to put you in the spot here, if you want to ask any questions that I missed, please do so down below. And also do let us know if you want Fraser or any of his colleagues to do any more of these interviews. And I'm sure we could kind of organize this as well.
Yeah, I'm sure I can help with that as well, facilitate that. And I'm going to do my big expedition to West Kalimantan in May. That's the plan. And that's funded by the Scientific Exploration Society, which I won my award for. So just to give them a plug. And if anyone out there who is a budding conservationist and who is interested in plants, who wants to make a big step into this field themselves and wants to apply for a grant, that next window will be open next year. So please feel free to apply. You don't have to be someone like me. You could just be the start of your career like a master's student and think I can do this as well. So.
Wonderful. Excellent. In that case, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, okay.
Amazing.
My conversation with Fraser really reminded me of the fact that we need to stop looking at houseplants in isolation. We need to start thinking bigger. We need to think about where they're coming from and what our role is in how those plants are coming towards us. And what we can do as collectors to protect them and their environment so we can still keep doing our hobby, essentially. If you've learned something from this video today, drop a leaf emoji or a plant emoji down below and let me know what you found was quite interesting. The resources that Fraser mentioned in the video are going to be down below in the description with links, so if you want to check those out, they are going to be down there for you to look at. And as always, I've got more conversations like this that are happening. I've heard you all that said that you want more kind of interview type videos to come up in my channel a bit more often, so I have got plans to do a lot of that coming up soon. You will still be getting the fun content, the educational content, and the general chaos that comes with my channel. So if you haven't subscribed, I always put this at the beginning of my video, I don't want to nag people, but if you haven't subscribed, please do consider subscribing down below. Give this video a like or share with other people that might be interested in what we talk about in these videos. It truly doesn't just help me, it helps the channel, it helps to push the videos out to a wider audience and we can together grow this community a bit more. But as always, I hope you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon and I truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, bye.